have you back. We're also particularly excited since today we're going to be having group discussions about things to make sure that this Strabo Spot application is doing what you want it to be doing. And we'll concentrate on vocabulary today and more on that in a bit. So again, people who have helped us with this, and let's say, please turn off your video, please mute except for breaks. Use the chat window for questions, and the agenda is in the PDF. We will have a break. People are using the Google Docs. Other communities have done this a little bit more. We're happy with whatever you want to do, but if you want to get it into competition, I'm just saying the sedimentologist did a little better with this, so putting that out there. Okay, this is today's agenda. We've modified it just a little bit. We're going to start with this intro, and then we're going to have just 10 minutes on project information, logistics of doing that, and then Jochen Metzger is going to show us an example, since he participated in the structural geology one as well, what he did for that, just to give you an idea of the sorts of things you can do, and basically what constitutes a project in sort of reasonable ways. We're then going to go to a 40-minute breakout. We have backed down a little bit about our lofty goals for this breakout. We're going to concentrate on vocabulary, and to the extent that workflow affects that vocabulary, go ahead and talk about that. What we're going to do is turn the discussion on Friday into the workflow priorities for Strabo 2, something called a blue skies discussion, which is just what would you want in an ideal world. So, but today we're just going to concentrate on vocabularies. Now that you've interacted a little bit with that, we're going to break out into 3 groups. Mike's going to be in charge of one, Stacey's in charge of one, Frank's going to be in charge of one, and then Mike's going to lead the report out from those groups when we come back. And then something I'm sure you'll want to hear is Noah is going to talk about Strabo Micro. So how that is developing, and then we're going to have a conclusion and then go our merry ways. So again, tomorrow we're going to talk not about, I should fix this, we're going to talk about workflow tomorrow, but we're also going to see some people's examples, and Alex will talk about getting ready to do that. So if you can have those projects loaded either by tonight or by tomorrow morning early, depending on what time zones you are. I know we're in multiple time zones. And we'll talk more about those projects. The thing we would like you to do tonight is work on the project and just have it uploaded. The micrograph mode vocabulary, I just realized we'll just do that all tomorrow. And so you don't need to even do that. So homework taken away. That's got to feel good. All right. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing screens. I'm going to look for any questions. And if not, I'm going to have Alex go ahead and share his screen and talk a little bit about projects, and you can go ahead and get ready to do so after Alex.
Great. I actually don't need to share my screen. I just have a couple logistical points. So it would actually be great if projects can come in this evening, and then tomorrow morning, Mike Williams and I will go over them, and we're going to pick out a few of the projects that we think kind of exemplify some of the different utilities and strengths of Strabo Spot, and we'll share those with the group. So what we're going to do is we want each person who's completing a project to send me 1 to 2 PowerPoint slides. I'm putting my email in the chat right now. 1 to 2 max PowerPoint slides that just really talk about how you used Strabo in this short project. So while we're all interested in your research, what we really want you to do is try to emphasize using Strabo and not necessarily the more scientific aspects of your work, although you know, you can obviously mention those as well. And then be prepared tomorrow to talk for less than 5 minutes, just describing your project. And what we'll do is I'll share the slides with the group, and I will advance them, and you can just narrate over the slides, your slides that I'm sharing. So just to recap, send 1 to 2 slides to my email this evening.
Just hearing about a few of the issues that came up in the various groups. And I was hoping maybe Frank and Basil, do you want to go first, just because Stacia was saying that maybe some of hers will be down to some more detailed terms and things, but do you guys want to go first and summarize some of the things that came up?
We can do that. Frank, I can just read out what the big points, and then you can go from there. Does that seem okay?
Sure does.
Same as last button.
Yep.
You better explain what that is, Basil.
No, you need to explain what that is.
Oh, okay. So the idea is, in terms of putting in the metamorphic characteristics, I guess the rock type as well as the minerals, we thought that it would be useful to speed things up to have a button that says same as last, and that would pre-populate both the rock type and also the mineralogy. And then when you switch to the mineralogy, you would be able to just check or uncheck boxes. That would make it as quick as possible.
Good idea.
Also, along that motif, with the mineralogy tab, we wanted buttons to show up with minerals that shows the minerals from the last 5 rocks you did, that you can basically just click on rather than having to go through the list 4. Do you want to add anything about that, Frank?
Well, I don't know if we decided on whether it was 5 rocks or whatever, but yes, but a recently used list of minerals that, again, would be checkboxes pre-populated from the last rock that you could then check or uncheck as you desired. Just we thought that would be a relatively easy programming effort that would enormously speed up adding that sort of information.
Or one thing that Frank and I talked about too, it already has a huge list of minerals on the sort of teaching side of minerals. So if you could just select some of those that were your favorites that would come up, pre-populated in a window, and then your last assemblage could be checked already, it would be another way to do it, rather than go to your last 5. Just have a favorites list that is the ones that are going to come up automatically.
Well, we're not programmers, and so we're not sure which should be easier or harder to do. And I think this something we'll have to ask Jason what he thinks. If you make it too complicated, it's likely to crash. But yes, I agree. We don't want to see the whole huge list, because that would take too long and people just wouldn't do it in the field.
All right, I'm going to skip over some of our discussion because there's go to, I guess, more major points. Nices, we thought there might want to be just a single nice tab with a click down if you wanted to go for orthonice or paranice, just to simplify that.
The thinking there is that both orthonice and paranice they're very commonly used terms in the field, but they are interpretive. I mean, sometimes it's really obvious, but we didn't think that having metamorphic rock, we shouldn't have interpretations involved in rock names. I think that's clear.
We were going to delete we're suggesting deleting myelinite and cataclysite as non-compositional. We were thinking of expanding facies a little bit to get more of the range of the amphibolites.
Epidote amphibolite and high amphibolite, and I guess those were the two, or upper amphibolite were the 2 different ones that we thought we'd like to add there.
We had a number of other comments too that might come up just in terms of those facies and zones.
Do you want to add them now?
No, I mean, I think the general comment was like the specificity of something like garnet cordiorite, which is kind of, it's not as much an index mineral as an association. And so, but we were discussing between the use of tags to sort of specify your specific field issue. They'll come up.
We had the same discussion.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really a question about how how easy and sensible it is to program that. If you put garnet and cordierite in the mineral list, and you click on, you know, schist or gneiss or something, those should all be searchable. You can search for all the garnet, cordierite, gneisses, and that's important. I think we want to definitely look ahead to being able to do that kind of search.
Okay,
but then the question is, do you want to have garnet, cordierite as a rock type? You know, and I know some people do.
Or is there
We tried to keep the rock name simple here, just because, you know, but that's why having this.
It's a specific zone that seems maybe more specific than we need, or else we got to have a number of other associations.
so
Well, how about, I mean, shouldn't that then be under zones, not rock type, but just under the zones? You know, scarlet, kyanite, garnet, cordierite. I agree. I think there it belongs entirely. Garnet, cordierite zone. Yep. You can have orthopyroxene zone too. That's another one people use in ultra high temperature rocks.
So one of the suggestions we had, I'm only going to do two more things. One is about zone, and to close it down. So it's, you have to open it to have an option, but then give it more depth. So talk about metapelite zones, calcsilicate zones, and so forth.
That's a good idea.
And then the last thing, and I think this one is pretty good and pretty easy, is it has, in mineralogy, it has habit. And we decided we needed to have an igneous habit and a separate metamorphic habit, so that the metamorphic terms are just metamorphic terms and they're available. So I think that's it, and we should stop since we're a little over our 5 minutes.
And I would make sure that the metamorphic habits are listed first before the igneous habits, since they'll be under the metamorphic tab.
Got it. Yeah, I'll write that down. Thank you, Stacia.
Okay, Stacia and Alex, do you want to just go in to tell us about some of the things that came up in your group?
Yeah, you just want me
Sure.
to share my screen, Stacia?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So we mainly really focused on those vocabulary words that were already in there, as well as thinking about ones that were potentially missing. And so I know this isn't the easiest thing to read, but we also discussed the gneisses, and I guess we could go with either the option that Frank and Basil talked about, or at least putting all three of those gneiss options on a single row so that they're more kind of clustered together. We then talked a lot about some of the protoliths that seem to be missing. So things like, you know, chert, as well as some of the more volcanic terms and felsic terms that we felt like should be underneath there, or evaporites. So just adding in some more options. In addition, under the rock name, sorry, I skipped over this, that was up at the top for migmatite. If you click on migmatite, having some other descriptive rock names listed under there of leucosome, melanosome, metatexite, diatexite, just adding in some more information in case people do want to break the migmatites down into more specific rock names. What else? Under facies or zones, we were trying to figure out a good place to think about more, you know, retrograde terms, as well as, like, for students in particular that might want to describe contact metamorphism or bake zones. And I don't think we kind of necessarily thought facies or zones were the right spot, but trying to think of a place to be able to put that within the app and kind of the options. And then under minerals, a couple of more textural terms of poikioblast, as well as being able to say whether a mineral is associated with an inclusion trail, and specifying the mineralogy of those inclusions. And then some additional terms for the reaction textures tab of symplectite, replacement or partial replacement. I think breakdown's already in there, but atoll and X solution, just including some of those textural terms. So that was kind of the main highlights and discussion points. Although if anyone from my group feels like I missed something, please chime in now.
Yeah, we also thought. I'm actually not sure, but similar to what Basil and Frank reported back, is having a way to maybe just copy minerals from a previous spot. So it seems like a common theme is just streamlining that, adding a mineral assemblage, not having to go through each time.
Came up everywhere.
One thing I'm going to add, we also talked about protoliths, and we like the word inferred protolith just because it's often interpretational. So I don't, if anybody has a strong feeling one way or the other on that.
Yeah, we had some comments about trying to separate out more interpretations and observations, thinking about things even like metapelite as being more of an interpretation. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that.
Well, especially because Strabo has a teaching side too, that we, aside for teaching. Let's fill in with a little bit from Nick and my group, just as we try to stick to our time a little bit. I was going to make one comment at the beginning, which I think is a big thing that came up in our group, which is and it's a big thing to me, is that I'm not sure we handle mylonites quite right. And I think in some ways you could think a mylonite could almost sit up there with igneous, metamorphic, sedimentary, and mylonite, in that there are some mylonites that is the rock classification. And it might not even be till you get the thin section that you can say that much more. But if it's a mylonite, you may have an entire hierarchy of other things that you're going to want to think about, separate from being simply igneous, metamorphic, or sedimentary. So we're struggling a little bit with where it seemed that you have to dig down too deeply to say the rock is a mylonite, when if it's a ultramylonite and it's big enough, that's all there is. Nick, do you want to highlight a few of the other high points?
Yeah, sure. So I've kind of highlighted, I think, the ones that are that we haven't gone too much into. So first, the protolith drop-down menu it's quite specific up front, but in the field, oftentimes you don't really know. So it'd be nice to have options just to say more general terms, metasedimentary or meta-igneous. I think we talked a little bit about how the reaction sub-tab, that vocabulary just is kind of incomplete and needs to be reworked, and there's some suggestions for that. There's not really a good way to deal with primary versus secondary minerals, and connected to that, kind of peak assemblages versus not peak assemblages. You can maybe solve that a little bit through tags, but probably we need to work that into the vocabulary. Mike just talked about mylonites. The connections between orientations and metamorphic observations is basically non-existent right now, and so kind of connecting the structure world to the metamorphic world is something that people are interested in. And variability and outcrop, this is kind of at the scale of one spot. Maybe protolith segregation, you might have two protoliths that are interlayered with each other, and having a way to kind of enter information for both of those.
And I could add to the whole thought of graded beds and
oh, yep.
Graded layers comes into that segregation. But if you go into segregation, you don't really have an option to really talk about something. And so many metamorphic metasediments have graded bedding, and you kind of describe the different layers with different assemblages sometimes.
Yeah.
The other thing that we just add to it,
that's about it.
One that you didn't highlight too is we did have some discussion of the skarns and the terminology for describing skarns and sort of hydrothermally, the zone between hydrothermal alteration and metamorphism, and so we have some more specific comments there that are going to be sort of added to the Google sheet too.
I have a general comment or question that I'd like the people to think about. I've noticed, I'm looking at the I could turn my video on here, I suppose. I've noticed, and when you're putting in the rock names and so on, well, first of all, there's an acceptable user interface thing, which I don't think is being followed here. I believe as long as it's going iOS, Apple's accepted user interface guidelines call for check boxes to be square and radio buttons to be round. And the difference, I mean, it's obviously somewhat trivial, but the difference is that check boxes, you can have multiple ones, and radio buttons, you can only have one out of a group. And I think that's a standard interface guideline that's Apple put out. But more importantly, I noticed that you can check more than one of these boxes. You can check a rock typing, igneous and metamorphic, and alteration. You can check it you can call it a phyllite and a calcilicate and a skarn. Is this what we want? Or do we want to have it be either or in terms of things like rock types? And I don't know the answer, because these all come under a spot, and it's certainly possible that one spot in the field could have more than one rock type, and you'd want to check them all. But if you're going with the philosophy that, you know, there should be one sample per spot, then having multiple rock types doesn't make any sense. And I'm just curious to know how people feel about that.
Can I maybe suggest that that's a very good point? It's kind of a philosophical one in some sense. Can we maybe push that off? We'll talk about that tomorrow explicitly. I think it might be a good idea to bring back a couple of these major points.
Yep.
And with suggestions like also this myelinite issue of where exactly it sits and so forth. So the conveners will try and get together to see if we can come up with a reasonable suggestion in the meantime. But
people may want to sleep on that a bit too and just think about it.
Exactly. In the meantime, I think it would be good if we switch over to Noah showing us about the Strabo micro, because I think between what Jochen showed us that was so nice to sort of show the power of using it in the field, I think this is going to be the power of using the thin sections, and to realize that they're combined in a single system. I think you'll get sort of the holistic view of it. So I'm kind of inclined to let Noah have enough time to do that. Noah, we see your screen, but we don't hear you.
All right, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
And I'll start this. All right, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Great. All right, so my name is Noah Phillips, and today I'm just going to give you an overview of Strabo Micro, which is going to be our interface for recording thin section observations. And so what I'm going to show you is basically what it is that we're designing, where it's currently at, because it's definitely at the infancy stage and it's currently being developed, and where we're kind of planning on going with it before it gets released. So this is not currently out there. It's planned to be a desktop app that communicates with the other Strabo interfaces. And so there's a whole team of people on the side here who are involved in it. And I just want to point out Jason Ash is the one who's done most of the hard work in programming this app, and then Nick Roberts has done most of the work in the designing of it. So Strabo Micro, like I said, it's built for thin section observations, and it's going to be a standalone app. And the purpose of having its own app is so that we can make observations at the thin section scale, and then within the Strabo framework, quickly find out the relevant field information from StraboSpot, if it's a field sample, or the relevant experimental information, if it's an experimental sample, in order to contextualize microstructural observations. So the goals in developing this software is to be able to seamlessly integrate observations across multiple scales. So all the way from the field observations all the way down to the nanoscale observations that we make, to make thin section observations fair, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we want Strabo Micro to serve as a digital notebook so that you can quickly share observations between colleagues and students. So things that we want it to be is that it's permanent, shareable, legible. We want to be able to tie thin sections to precise field locations or corresponding experimental results, and quickly move across scales. Then this last point here is really important. We want to be able to search other people's thin section observations so that we can quickly compare between samples from different localities. And this, like we've been talking just now, and that you guys just talked about in the groups, is where the vocabulary becomes really important. All right, so I'm just going to quickly switch over to Strabo Micro now. Okay, so can everybody see the Strabo Micro interface?
Yep, we can see it.
Great. So this is the Strabo Micro interface. Like I said, it's a standalone app that works on any desktop or laptop. You log into the app in the same way that you log in to the online Strabo Spot interface. And so that allows you to connect your microstructural observations instantly with the field data or the experimental data that it came from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly start a new project. And I'm going to call it Strabo Metamorphic. And there's a bunch of metadata that you can put in when you start a new project. There's a bunch of metadata that you can put in as you add the samples. But I'm just going to move through this relatively quickly to save on time. The sample. So the sample I'm going to show you is from the Sulu ultra high pressure metamorphic province in China. And it's a garnetite sample. And once again, there's a bunch of metadata that you can put in for every sample that you input into the system. And so all the observations in Strabo Micro are made, you orient everything relative to some base image. And so in this case, I'm going to upload a thin section scan in plain polarized light of the thin section that I'm going to look at. And every time you upload an image to the system, there is a way to set the scale, either by, if you know kind of the pixel to length conversion factor, you can just put it in as conversion factor, or you can trace the scale bar. In this case, because it's a standard thin section, I know that the thin section is 27 millimeters across. So I'm just going to put a scale bar across my thin section and set that equal to 27 millimeters. So now this is getting uploaded into the system. It's creating my new project associated with this thin section. And once it's uploaded, I can start uploading other images kind of that are co-located onto this reference photomicrograph. So here's my Sulu garnetite sample, and we know that this reference photo is a plain polarized light photomosaic. So here you see the garnets that have this kind of strong shape for orientation, and these bunches of amphicite in here, and then there's the little opaques are rutile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an associated micrograph. So this is a micrograph that I'm going to locate relative to my reference photomicrograph. And I'm going to open up a data set that was collected in EBSD, so an electron backscatter diffraction, and it's a phase map just showing the distribution of phases based on the reflections off of the crystals. So there's a bunch of ways to locate your micrograph onto the reference photomicrograph. If it's, say, a data point, or if it's in a different orientation, then you can just say that it's not located onto this reference micrograph. But if you know what it is, then you can locate it as a scaled rectangle onto the reference micrograph. And that's what we'll do here. And then there's a bunch of different ways to locate it onto the reference micrograph. You can, if you know, if it has a scale bar, you can just trace the scale bar and it'll resize the image for you, and you can drag it into the correct place. If your image doesn't have a scale bar, you can stretch and drag it into the right place. And that's what we're going to do here because this image doesn't have a scale bar. So that opens up this set micrograph location and scale window. And I can take my associated micrograph and resize it and reposition it so that it's in the right spot. So I know that these omphacite grains here correspond with these ones up here. So I'm just going to resize this image to try to fit it over top. And I'm not going to get it perfect, but good enough for a demonstration. All right. So you can play with the opacity to kind of help you locate it in the right spot as well. Once you hit finish, that's going to co-locate your image on top of your reference base map. So if we go back to our reference image, we can see exactly where that image is located on top of it. And we can have several different layers of images, each located on top of images at a different scale. So for example, I can open up a new image, which is so I'll just load up one more image to show you how this works. I'll open up a calcium map that was made on the microprobe, the calcium WDS map. And I'm going to do the same thing and just locate it as a scaled rectangle onto this second image. And so I can do the same thing and stretch and drag until I get it into the right spot. Rotate it as need be. And you can play with the opacity to make sure you've got it in approximately the right place. Then hit finish. And it saves it and all its location information onto the reference micrograph above it. Okay, the other nice thing that we can do is everything on this left-hand panel is organized by the sample, but we can also organize our images by group. So let's say I wanted to have a group that was all my calcium maps put together, then I could create a new group and just say calcium maps. And it'll show all the data that I've uploaded, and I could select multiple data sets. In this case, I'll just select one and it'll show me all my calcium maps in one place. And I could do that from many different samples. On the top right-hand side of the screen, this is going to be kind of our tools menu. And then here is where, like in Strabo Spot, we have our ability to create spots. So we can create point, line, and polygon spots to input different data types. So for example, if you're collecting chemical data on the probe and you have a bunch of point spots, you could start putting them in as point spots onto your reference photomicrograph or any subphotomicrograph. This top one opens up a bunch of tabs, kind of like in Strabo Spot, where you can input a bunch of different types of data. So here we have a mineralogy tab, a grain info tab, and a fabric tab. That's all of these have started to be coded up. So I'll just show you quickly the mineralogy tab. So this allows us to start entering our mineralogy data. So in this case, I know these garnets are almandines, so I can select almandine and say that I have, say, 85% almandine, and I know most of the rest of this is omphacite, 10% omphacite, and let's say most of the rest of it is rutile. I could say, oops. Subset. But then you can say how those percentages were calculated. That hasn't been coded up yet, and save that into the system. And then now we have our mineralogy data associated with our micrograph. And then this pane in the bottom here is going to be for notes. I'm just going to go quickly back to the PowerPoint and just show you where we're moving in the future. So one of the big things that we're moving towards is when we upload our reference photomicrograph, we can put in our orientation data so that we have a reference coordinate system that we can directly compare different features and the sizes of them and their orientations across different scales. And so that's being coded up now. In the top right-hand corner, we have all these tools for measurements. Yeah, this ruler will be dynamic, so as you zoom in and out, the scale will change, and it'll show the reference coordinate system as well as the pixel coordinate system across every image. We're also going to have these kind of geo emojis, and these are going to be, I'll call them speed spots. So by clicking on a geo emoji and then clicking on a corresponding feature you see in your thin section that matches that geo emoji, it'll create a spot and tell you, pre-write all the information you need for that. So for example, this spot, this geo emoji here shows a left lateral sigma class. So if I saw left lateral sigma class in my thin section, I could just click on the geo emoji, click on where that left lateral sigma class is in my thin section, and it would automatically record all the information I need for that. And then finally, these tabs that we're currently working on, there's going to be a whole series of them for describing mineralogy, fabrics, grain shapes and orientations, metamorphic textures, age dates, you name it. Hopefully we'll have a tab so that you can input your metadata in there. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
You know, I have a question. I wonder, when you place a spot on a photomicrograph, do you get the full spots functionality of Strabo Spot, or are these spots going to have their own set of menus and things?
So I think basically they're going to have their own sets of menus. Yeah.
You're not placing a spot that's the same as a field spot, as you know.
Well, you're creating, so right now here I'll show you. So
I'm just saying, would a spot itself have a mineralogy?
you can make a spot have a mineralogy, yeah. So here, I'll create a spot. Oops. That says enter data for that spot. This hasn't been all coded up yet, but we'll just say site, and we'll say it's a site frame. I'm pretty sure now that this spot is here, I can actually add mineralogy to that spot. So I can do all the things I was doing at the thin section scale to an individual spot. And the way we started coding this up, we'll see if it actually works for me now. But if I put in a mineral at a smaller scale, so let's say I've zoomed in really far and I saw a phase that's only trace. So let's say I saw a little bit of biotite within this spot. If I add that here, then what should happen is when I go back to my thin section, it's added biotite in gray. So it knows that within this spot that's zoomed out that there is biotite somewhere because I've inputted it in a submicrograph.
Great, thanks.
I've got a quick question for you, Noah. This is Drew Levy. So is the plane polarized light picture you have here, is it given kind of like a reference frame, or are points or images within that geo-referenced?
Okay, so currently it's not, but right now Nick has mocked up everything that's needed for that. So there's a paper by Basil and Nick that's come out about how best to take your oriented samples and then basically upload them into a system like this. And basically there's going to be a tool when you upload your reference micrograph that has everything spatially located. Yeah.
Okay, because I guess what I'm thinking is this would be really powerful if you're making kind of a map of grains within a thin section to then take to like an LAICPMS. It'd be great if you could kind of reference all your points on an image in Strabo Micro and then kind of take that image to, you know, some instrument and then kind of upload it into the interface there. But maybe that's just something for the future, but certainly seems like this would be a good avenue for that.
Yeah, so we've definitely been discussing that a bit in terms of bringing over especially big data sets that you've collected on instruments, like say you collect a lot of point data on the probe and you want to input it into StraboSpot, but you don't want to have to reselect where every single point is, to make sure that when you're getting data from instruments, that there's some way of transforming the coordinate system so that it's really easy to upload into StraboSpot. So it's on our minds, but we're not quite at that stage.
So Drew, I'll add a little bit to that. So no instrument does it the same way as any other instrument, so there's no commonality. So by having StraboSpot set a commonality, then everything can transfer into or out of StraboSpot. And then the ultimate idea is to try and work with the machine developers, the equipment, the SEMs, and so forth, to get them to use or to at least output their data in that system. So we're a decade away from that, but
Okay.
but at least we now know what we want,
So,
and we will have some kind of conversion protocol.
so a related question, and I maybe this has been answered, but I'm going to go to a machine, maybe the microprobe, and I'm going to select spots to analyze. I can take my laptop and add the spots to the image as I go. This is where I'm analyzing, and then I put those points onto the image already. I
Yes.
assume it's possible.
That would certainly work. And
Yeah.
so,
and I think while we're designing it, one of the goals is that inputting data and inputting images is relatively quick, so that hopefully it's quick enough that you can do it while you're collecting data.
So Strabo overlays a UTM type grid where every number further down just tells you the next spatial scale down, and then it has that XYZ, and then it orients that coordinate system back to real space. That was the simplest way we could come up with to do that.
Very cool. Thanks.
Other questions for Noah, unless Noah, do you have anything else you wanted to show?
No, I think that's all I've got. Unless Nick or anybody wants to jump in and share something.
Nope. I think you summed it up pretty well.
So can you import layers from Illustrator? Certainly that's going to be the goal. Again, the functionality of the micro is not fully developed. So right now, no, but right now you can't even use it. So, but that certainly will be something we can do, because that's also a simple import. It's just grid matching. So it's a simple linear transformation. So going forward, I think you see why we're so motivated to involve the metamorphic community relatively early in this. Will Lamb at Texas A&M has agreed to be sort of the coordinator for the metamorphic community. So thank you, Will, for doing this. And we've learned from past lessons, and so all the people who are doing this are going to be centered at A&M, so to sort of facilitate their interaction. So Nick Perez is doing the sedimentary petrology, and then Julie Newman will be the coordinator for the structural geology, so that it's all in one place, and then the metamorphic presumably is integrated with the igneous, integrated with the structural geology, integrated with the sedimentology, and that the tools developed by one also translate to the tools developed by others. Will, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that sums it up.
So in the future, we'll be looking for participant groups to help out with the exact same sort of thing that we're doing now, which is this the vocabulary we want? is this the right sort of workflow we want? Is this the right sort of overall protocol we want? I should also say that we're working with the EPOS, which is, or EPOS is to European Union, like EarthCube is to NSF. And so there's this large initiative going forward in Europe, and we're actively collaborating with the microstructures version of that. And so the idea is to also, if we can, collaborate internationally with the petrology, igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary with that. Are there any other questions? You can unmute at this point if you want to and ask. You can put in the chat. Can the thin sections, micro details in Strabo Micro be linked back to samples in Strabo Spot? Yes, that's exactly the point. That those are completely linked, and the spot hierarchy is not broken, so that an individual mineral that you've analyzed knows where it belongs in the field. And perhaps a tab indicating these details are available. Right, and so the difference, the only wrinkle, and it's a good wrinkle, is that what we're hoping is that the experimental community will also use Strabo Spot. And so if you have a microstructure, you don't know whether it's experimental or natural, except that it'll be labeled as that. But that will facilitate the cross comparison between natural and experimental, was the idea. So that's why we've worked so hard to bring the experimental community on board.
Basil, can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
If you've gone out in the field and you created a bunch of spots, and the spots have samples, and then you come back and you finally get your thin sections and you sit on the microscope to look at them, do you, instead of the way Noah did it just now, where he started a project on a thin section, do you start with the spot that you collected in the field and go to Strabo Micro, or how do you connect that field spot back to the thin section you're about to look at a month after you come out of the field?
So Mike, we have not developed the program to do that. And so that is still under consideration. And we'll be trying to think about what is the most effective way of doing that in the future. So if anybody has any idea, that would be useful. Julie has jumped on, so she's really the PI lead on the microstructures. Julie, do you want to add anything to that question or about anything else you want to do?
Hi. No, it's just one of the most important aspects of it is that we'll be able to link the images and the data that we get from these images to their field context, where they're from, or the experimental conditions that they were deformed under, and having them all in one place so that we can compare them. I see another question about linking thermobarometry data to the spots. And again, that's one of the points. When we work, we like to keep track of the spatial information of the stuff that we're getting from. So yeah, you could link any data, any analyses that you have to a spot. So within your spot, you could hold either a link for where the data are, or you could hold the data. And that's something that we're working out, and that's something that we're going to be reaching out to the community for. You know, what is the workflow? What's the best way to do that? But also, at what granularity do you want to be able to search data? Is it enough to just have, oh, there's a spreadsheet there? Or do you need to be able to search the spreadsheet? Those are all conversations to have within the community. So we'll be looking to you guys for help with that, those conversations.
Julie, there was another question about even an estimate of release of Strabo Micro.
So yeah, I think that's a really hard one to answer. The issue is once we release it and once people start putting data in it, we can't make changes anymore. So we really want to get to a point where we know that your data will be safe. before we release it. What we found in talking to different groups about it is people already really like the part about just helping to keep track of their thin sections, of their images, even without the ability to put in data about them. And I think that part will probably be pretty much set at some point, and we may be able to start releasing it in stages depending on what the community wants. So that part is pretty much done, but we do want to make sure that we don't want to make major changes, because then you would lose your data.
So I think you get that, because we talked today about the vocabulary that existed in Strabo, and as we change those, I mean, the programmers are going to object, but we might just do it anyway. But that's if we release it, we don't want to change vocabulary, is the bottom line. All right. If there's no other thoughts or questions, I wanted to do a quick poll. We still have most people left here. I'm going to look at participants, and I'm going to ask you to go to reactions. And I would like for people who are going to present a project or think they'd like to present a project to just give a thumbs up or a clap or anything, just so we can evaluate approximately how many people. No project is too small. We just kind of want to see what you're doing and what you're thinking about when you do that. So if you don't mind, just go in and just give us kind of a reaction.
Basil, I had to do a double take. At first, I thought you were talking about the tab of reactions under the IGMET.
No. We decided that was text.
You just want to show of hands who's going to present tomorrow, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you can actually raise. Can't you raise your hand in this thing?
You can do that as well. So
yeah.
So I'm not seeing a whole. Okay, I got to tell you, the sentimentologists, man, they're much more active.
But I think
it was somewhere between a third and 50%, actually.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, the hands go away after a few minutes. So
okay, well, good. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm glad Alex is on the ball, because I'm not. Great. Okay, so Alex, there's enough to actually do this tomorrow?
Yep.
I think so, yeah.
And then also for tomorrow, it seems like we should I think we should concentrate on workflow, which is where we're really poised to move quickly is Strabo 2. Like, because the metamorphic petrology and the structure community kind of work really quite well together, like, what do you want? What do you want in Strabo 2? Like, I've learned this from working with metamorphic petrologists. Literally, structural geologists will measure first and look at minerals later, and metamorphic petrologists are exactly the opposite way around. Now, that's not everybody, clearly, but there is that tendency. So the question is, what for a metamorphic petrologist will speed up your workflow that we want in Strabo 2? That's the community discussion I think we'd like tomorrow. So you can dream a little bit, because if Nick says, that's going to be pretty easy, and Jason says, yeah, it's going to be pretty easy, we'll go with it. But you don't know if you don't ask. So the question is, and I want you to think about, what is it you want to be doing? What is it that would speed up your workflow? And then that's the conversation we can have tomorrow. Does anybody have any questions about that? Nick, do you have any suggestions for what people could be thinking about with respect to Strabo 2 for metamorphic rocks?
It's what you said, you just picture yourself in the field. What's the order of things that you do? What are things that you do over and over again every time you come to an outcrop or a rock? What are the things that you want at your fingertips? And and what do you most care about?
What I tried to do just to test it, I just grabbed a rock either from home, grabbed a rock in the lab, and tried to make it a spot just to see how it would go. And it gives you could try that. Just grab a rock and say you got to it as an outcrop.
Right.
The
So
other thing I would suggest is potentially going to your field notebook and looking at everything that you write down for a specific locality and making sure there's a spot in Strabo spot for that information.
great. Okay. Well, thank you all for showing up today.
Basil, can I make one other announcement? I just want to remind all those people that raised their hand about projects that you're going to just email 2 PowerPoint slides to Alex by tonight. And the idea is not so much to give us a full background on the research project as much as how are you using Strabo. I think our goal would be to try to get through quite a few of the different projects so people get an idea of the different things that are going on. So just a relatively brief summary of 2 PowerPoint slides tonight. And we may have to pick and choose, but we'll try to get through as many as we can in the time we have tomorrow. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. That's an excellent point. In the other communities, we've not been able to show all the projects, and we've tried to show more of a range of how people are using it. So again, there's no value judgment here. It's just what we can do in the time we have that shows a diversity of use. Okay, we're going to keep it under 2 hours once again today. Thank you all. I thought we had a really productive discussion, and we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow for the last of these meetings, and looking forward to seeing what everybody's doing.